Today we're making Swedish meatballs, a rich comfort dish with a history dating back to the 1770s. We'll take the opportunity to talk about the classic approach and some modern elements, starting with the onion. Immediately we have a decision to make. The older recipes would call for this to be added directly to the mixture, giving you a sharper, more vibrant onion flavor and a bit of a bite. The more modern approach would call for this to be gently fried in butter. And for the purpose of demonstration, that's what we're going to do today. Medium-low heat, we melt some butter. And essentially, the difference between the two approaches comes down to heat and moisture. It is through heat that we're evaporating the water content of the onions, concentrating their flavors and their sweetness in particular. And you want to cook this without color, particularly because we're using butter. And the recipe just a guideline. Try this, try the raw version, try a combination of both, make it your own. See the steam coming out, that's the water content evaporating. While that's happening, we deal with the breadcrumbs. You want them to be relatively coarse and very, very dry. So this is already on the finer side that I could tolerate. What we essentially want to do is to turn this into a carrier of moisture, and B, our binding agent. So we add some whole milk. You want them to be soft, but you don't want them to disintegrate and start forming a paste. And it's important to do this separately so you guarantee even hydration and you don't get a surprise crunchy bit when you bite into your meatballs. One optional, not authentic touch is I like to add a small dash of double cream to this to give it a bit of extra richness, but not so much that it will start altering the texture of the meatballs. Give it a mix. And we give it about 10 minutes. Just enough time also for the onions to finish sweating and cool down. After 10 minutes, our onions are translucent and just slightly warm. We add them to the mixing bowl. As you might have noticed, I'm intentionally not rinsing the pan. You'll find out why later. And to fully cool them down, we have our breadcrumb mixture. And we give them a mix to make sure we're at the desired temperature before we introduce the meat. Perfect. Now, our mince goes in. Today, we go for the classic 50-50 beef and pork mince. You want to aim for about 20% fat for the best texture. Now, we beat 1 egg for every 500 grams of mince. And once again, it's beneficial to mix them separately, just to make sure everything's even. Now, the egg yolk would act as a binding agent, especially for the fat content. And the fat from the egg yolk itself would give us richness. The protein of the egg white, on the other hand, would give us structure, while the water content, and egg white's 90% water content, would give us moisture. So, gently mix everything together. We start to season. First with salt, white pepper for a bit of refined heat, 2 optional spices, allspice, which is a spice, not a mixture of spices. This mostly would give us a bit of warmth, and nutmeg, a bit of subtle sweetness, and double cream's best friend. It is important that you mix this gently to get that light texture. If you were to overwork it, the protein would start to bind together too aggressively, making the meatballs way too dense. Perfect, let's make some meatballs. It doesn't really matter how big or how small. The consensus seems to be golf ball size. But once again, it depends on your cooking method. So if you intend on making a gravy afterwards, you can afford bigger because you know you can finish it in the sauce. If you want the meatballs simply fried, make them smaller. So by the time they're golden, they're perfectly cooked. Slightly smaller than a golf ball. And you want them to just hold their shapes. Once again, you don't want them too dense. For me, I'd rather my meatballs falling apart than have the texture of a rubber. Perfect. We once again bring in some heat to our pan, which now has a layer of natural sugar from the onion. We once again melt some butter. And be generous with your butter. A, because of the uneven shape, and B, if you want to make a gravy. This would be the fat for our roux later. Perfect. Now, meatballs. Very carefully and gently, they go in. And do them in batches if you're making a lot so you don't overcrowd the pan. Now, the reason why we did not clean the pan is because using butter like the traditional recipes. You don't want to bring the heat meaningfully above 150 degrees Celsius, at which point the butter would start to burn and instead of richness, we'll get bitterness. But for the meat to develop that deep, meaty flavor from the Maillard reaction, you want to bring the heat above 140. So we have a 10 degrees Celsius safety margin to play with, and the residual natural sugar from the onion would help give us some color. Now, once they're no longer sticking, meaning they've rendered out some of their fat, we can very gently start turning them. Beautiful. Dare I say, wouldn't be able to get this color but for the onions without burning the butter. Perfect. Now they come out to rest. We lower the heat to medium-low to mop up all those beautiful, slightly burned bits and all the rendered fat from the pork, from the beef. We make our gravy. To the pan, add some all-purpose flour and we start to stir. And what's going to happen here is that the extremely tasty fat would start coating each flour and in turn coating each starch granule of the flour, preventing them from clumping together. And once you can no longer see any visible white dots, our cooking liquid goes in. You can use any stock, you can even use water, as long as it's cold. Because once we introduce the liquid, the starch content of the flour starts to swell, gelatinizing in the process. And that's what's going to thicken the sauce, give us that creamy texture. And the low temperature is key to slow down this process, to buy yourself more time, to prevent the starch from clumping together. And of course, a secondary benefit is that the stock would also start to deglass the pan, mopping up those beautiful, tasty burn bits from the onion, from the beef, from the pork. And slowly you start to see a smooth texture. And bit by bit, we add our cooking liquid. And you make this as thick, as thin as you like. Now we taste. Oh, beautiful. And we continue to season. First, with the optional Worcester sauce. This would bring a bit of tang to balance the richness of the dish and a ton of umami to make the dish even more savory. And to reinforce the richness, we add a small dash of double cream. At this point, my mixture is not boiling because I don't want the double cream to curdle up. Very gentle heat. Now the meatballs, they go back in to finish cooking, to mop up all the beautiful flavors on the pan. And because we have pork in the mix, you don't want something medium rare. You want to bring the core temperature to just above 7 degrees Celsius. Oh, look at that. Just mixing everything together. And that's Swedish meatballs done.